I used to believe in fairy tales, not the kind with ball gowns or magic spells, but the kind where love means safety, where someone stands beside you no matter what. In Adrian, I thought I had that. He was gentle when I needed quiet, strong when the world felt too loud. Our mornings were slow, warm, filled with shared glances over coffee. I trusted him with everything, my heart, my fears, my future. And when you trust someone like that, it never crosses your mind that they might be performing. My father always had his doubts. He was a man who saw through smiles and polite handshakes, and he warned me more than once about Adrian's ambition. But I loved Adrian, fiercely, maybe stubbornly. I defended him every time, convinced my father just couldn't see what I saw. Eventually, he stopped pushing, trusting that I knew what I was doing. When he passed, the grief was unbearable. And Adrian was right there, whispering strength into the silence. It felt like love. I needed it to be love. He was everything I needed him to be: patient, present, dependable. He helped with the legal mess, stood by me during the funeral, and held my hand like it meant something. I remember thinking, "Dad, you were wrong. He really is the one. The inheritance, the board meetings, the heavy responsibility." Adrian made it all feel a little lighter. I started to believe we were unshakable, but now, looking back, I realize even the most solid trust can hide cracks no one sees coming. I remember sitting at my father's desk, the one with the smooth oak edges and the faint smell of his cologne still lingering in the leather chair. I felt overwhelmed, drowning in legal documents and decisions I never imagined making without him. But Adrian was there, offering to read through the contracts, to take that burden off my shoulders. And I let him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. I wanted to believe he had my best interest at heart, not just in words, but in action. We spent evenings going through paperwork together, side by side like partners in a mission. He'd make little jokes to lighten the mood, rubbing my back when I got too tense. I told myself this was what marriage was supposed to look like, two people navigating the storms together. I started sleeping a little easier, thinking maybe this wasn't just about loss. Maybe it was the beginning of something stronger. Adrian seemed so steady, so trustworthy. If there were signs back then, I couldn't see them through the fog of gratitude. There's something dangerous about needing someone that much. You stop questioning their motives, and you start filling in the blanks with hope. I saw his support as love. I saw his involvement as loyalty. I never once asked myself why he was suddenly so interested in the estate's finer details. I was grieving, and I let him in, fully, completely. I thought I was building a new chapter with him by my side. I didn't realize I was handing him the pen to rewrite the ending without me. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel something I couldn't quite name. A restlessness, maybe, or a subtle shift in the air between us. Adrian hadn't changed, not in any obvious way, but I began catching these small moments, his eyes lingering on documents a little too long, the way he asked questions that felt strategic. It was nothing I could prove, just a feeling that burrowed under my skin like a splinter. I told myself it was stress. I told myself I was imagining things. But even the most loyal hearts can start to hesitate when instincts whisper louder than logic. I found myself rereading certain emails, double-checking things I normally wouldn't. I wasn't looking for betrayal. I was trying to reassure myself that it wasn't there. Because I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. I'd staked so much on believing in him, in us. And yet, every time I pushed that unease aside, it found its way back, like a shadow that kept shifting with the light. There was a night, I can still picture it, when I sat at the edge of our bed, watching Adrian sleep. I remember wondering if I really knew the man beside me, or just the version I wanted to believe in. That question lodged itself in my chest like a quiet ache. And once it was there, it wouldn't leave. It was the beginning of something I didn't want to face. But some truths don't stay hidden forever. Eventually, they come looking for the light. It started small. A few odd phone calls Adrian would take in the hallway, his voice low, almost rehearsed. The moment I walked in, the conversation would stop, followed by a tight smile and some vague excuse. I brushed it off at first. Everyone has private things, right? But then it became a pattern. Calls he wouldn't explain, meetings that didn't match his calendar, and a growing feeling in my gut that whatever was happening wasn't innocent. One afternoon, I walked into his study while he was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. At least, that's what I told myself. I was just looking for the folder from our last meeting with the advisor. But what I found, it wasn't just financial notes. Hidden behind a drawer compartment was a red folder with printed emails, all of them chillingly detailed. Subject lines like plan outline and phrases like when she receives the inheritance turned my stomach into ice. I sat there, frozen, reading words written by my husband to someone else, someone who knew everything about my assets, my father's estate, even our prenup. It was all mapped out like a strategy game, and I was the unwitting prize. The worst part? The emails dated back to before our wedding. Every anniversary, every smile, every tender moment, all poisoned. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just quietly took photos of every page and told myself, you are not going to fall apart. Not yet. I moved through the rest of the day like a ghost in my own home. I smiled when Adrian came back from his run. I nodded through dinner. I even kissed him goodnight. But inside, something had shifted. The foundation I thought we stood on was gone, and in its place was a hollow space where love used to live. I kept hearing his voice in those emails, cold, transactional, calculating, and I kept asking myself the same question. How did I not see it? The answer hurt more than the betrayal itself. I didn't see it because I didn't want to. I had been so desperate to believe in our story, in our home, in the comfort we'd built. I ignored what didn't fit. My father's warnings, the way Adrian always wanted to handle the money, the sudden charm that had swept me off my feet. I thought I'd found a partner. But all I'd really done was walk straight into a well-dressed trap, and now I had to figure out how to escape it. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let him know I knew. Not yet. If he sensed anything, he'd twist it, cover his tracks, spin a new lie like he always did. No, I needed to be smarter, calmer. I needed to beat him at his own game. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I put on a smile, poured him a glass of wine, and said, "Thank you for always being here for me." And in that moment, I meant it, not as a wife, but as a woman about to reclaim her power. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed beside him, his arm draped over me like a claim, not a comfort. I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything, every dinner, every compliment, every kiss that now felt rehearsed. I kept thinking about how he looked at me during my father's funeral. How he held me. Was it pity? Victory? Strategy? It's terrifying how well someone can mimic love when they're after something. And Adrian had played the part flawlessly. But if there's one thing I inherited from my father, it's resilience. He taught me to never let emotions cloud judgment, to observe quietly, gather facts, and never strike without certainty. So that's what I decided to do. I'd watch Adrian more closely. I'd dig deeper. I'd protect what was mine with the same fierce precision my father once did. Because love might have blinded me, but betrayal cleared my vision. And now I saw him for exactly what he was. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending I was still the woman who trusted him. That nothing had changed. That I didn't know the truth hiding in his inbox. But behind every nod, every smile, I was building a plan. A quiet, deliberate storm that he wouldn't see coming. And when it arrived, It wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical, controlled. And it would begin with one simple shift, taking back everything he thought he already owned. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than him, which was rare. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee in silence, watching the sun crawl across the marble countertop. Something in me had shifted, not just broken, transformed. I wasn't the same woman who cried at my father's will reading or leaned into Adrian's shoulder for support. I had crossed into something colder, sharper, and it wasn't rage driving me, it was clarity. I started with the small things, updating passwords, checking joint accounts, tracking his spending habits. I requested a private meeting with my family's attorney, someone I trusted like blood. I didn't give her the full story, not yet, just enough to make her raise an eyebrow and lean in. We began drafting quiet amendments, transferring control of the most vulnerable pieces first. Adrian didn't notice, or if he did, he underestimated me. That was his first mistake. At home, I played the part, smiling, asking about his day, making dinner like nothing had changed. But inside, I was studying him like a case file. Every word he spoke, every glance toward my laptop, every delayed explanation was logged and stored. I stopped thinking of him as my husband. I started seeing him as a threat I had once loved. That was the hardest part, grieving a person who's still alive and sleeping in your bed. I began documenting everything, dates, times, conversations, even the way his tone shifted when money came up. I wasn't just protecting my assets anymore. I was building a timeline, a pattern, a trail that pointed directly to his intentions. My lawyer started connecting the dots too, and I could see it in her face, the way sympathy slowly gave way to professional focus. She asked if I was ready to move forward. I said not yet, not until I had everything. Meanwhile, Adrian kept playing his role, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding around him. He'd bring me flowers out of nowhere, offer to help with family emails, ask questions that once felt sweet but now sounded strategic. It was like watching a magician after you've learned the trick. Suddenly, everything felt staged. But I kept my performance steady. No raised voices, no dramatic stares, just smiles, soft laughter, and quiet defiance building beneath the surface. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. At first it was just facts, but eventually the pages filled with feelings I didn't say out loud. Rage, yes, but also sadness and grief. Grief for the woman I used to be, the marriage I thought I had, the love I truly gave. But every entry reminded me of something vital. I wasn't broken. I was evolving. And one day soon, I'd stop pretending. He just wouldn't know when. He still thought he had me wrapped around his finger. That was the irony. Every evening he'd kiss my forehead, thank me for dinner, and drift off beside me as if nothing had changed. But I had changed, completely. I had shifted from reactive to deliberate, from wounded to watchful. The silence between us wasn't emptiness anymore. It was strategy. A slow, simmering storm he couldn't hear coming over the sound of his own confidence. There were moments when I almost slipped. When I'd hear him laugh and feel the ghost of what I used to love, or when he touched my back in the kitchen, and for a second, the muscle memory of affection threatened to break me. But then I'd remember that folder, the emails, the betrayal written in black and white, dated and signed, and I'd steel myself all over again. This wasn't love anymore. This was a slow extraction from the man who had fooled me. I stopped needing him to admit anything. I didn't want apologies or explanations. I wanted precision. I wanted protection. I wanted control. And with every step I took behind the scenes, I got closer to all three. He didn't notice the locks changing, the permissions shifting, the distance growing. But he would. Soon. Very soon. And when that moment came, I wouldn't flinch. I wouldn't yell. I would simply let him feel what I felt, but without a single warning. I chose a Friday night. Something about the end of the week felt right, like closing a chapter. I sent Adrian a message that morning. "Let's have dinner tonight. I have something to celebrate." He replied with a heart emoji and a thumbs up. I smiled at the screen, knowing this would be the last time I played the part. The reservations were made. The guest list was set, small, intentional. My lawyer, a notary, 2 close friends who had stood by me longer than he ever had. I dressed with care, like armor. A sleek black dress, the same one I wore the night Adrian proposed. Fitting, really. Full circle. I looked in the mirror and didn't see the woman who once cried herself to sleep. I saw someone composed, decisive. My hands didn't shake when I picked up the folder. My voice didn't waver when I rehearsed the words I'd say. I wasn't walking into dinner as a wife. I was walking in as a woman finally done with being underestimated. Adrian arrived exactly on time, smiling like a man who still thought he was adored. He kissed my cheek, complimented my perfume, made small talk about traffic. I let him. I nodded. I laughed once. Let him settle into the illusion one last time. We sat at the head of the private room, our guests spaced around the table, sipping wine and waiting for the toast. And when the glasses were raised, I stood, calm, steady, folder in hand, and said, "There's something I need to share with all of you." The room fell into that kind of silence that only happens right before everything changes. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, like each page was a weapon I'd chosen carefully. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I began reading, not all of it, just enough. Phrases like, "after the inheritance clears," and "she won't suspect anything." I watched Adrian's face drain of color. He didn't interrupt at first. He didn't know how. Then came the stammering, the denial, the desperate scramble for control. "You misunderstood. It's not what it looks like." I looked him straight in the eye, held up another printed email, and said, "This one's dated 3 months before our wedding. Care to explain that too?" His words started to tumble. Excuses, half lies, the beginning of tears. But I was done absorbing damage. I cut through it all with one sentence. "Our marriage was built on fraud, Adrian, and I have the legal right to dissolve it as such." My lawyer slid the documents across the table like clockwork. Annulment papers, asset protections, restraining clauses. Adrian stared at them like they were written in a language he couldn't read. And maybe they were. A language of consequence, of boundaries, of a woman who had reclaimed her voice. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't even feel rage. I felt something quieter, something steadier. I felt free. And for the first time in months, I could breathe without pretending. Adrian sat there frozen, papers in front of him like broken promises stacked in legal form. He looked around the table, hoping for someone to step in, to soften the blow, to give him an escape. But no one did, because everyone in that room had seen the evidence. And more importantly, they had seen me, standing unshaken, refusing to let his lies define my story anymore. His voice cracked as he tried again. "Isabella, please." But I didn't flinch. I told him he had until Monday to vacate the house, that his name was already removed from all shared accounts, that security would be notified if he tried to enter my properties again, and I said it all without raising my voice. That's the thing about power. Real power. It doesn't shout. It doesn't slam doors. It simply draws a line and dares the other person to cross it. And when they realize they can't, that silence is louder than anything. He didn't try to argue again. He just sat there, stunned, like a man watching a kingdom crumble that he never truly built. I left the folder on the table, walked out of the restaurant without looking back. The night air hit my skin like a baptism, cool, clean, and mine. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just breathed, one deep breath at a time. Because what came next wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding, on my terms, for the first time in a long, long time. The house felt different without him, not emptier, just quieter, lighter. I walked through each room like I was meeting it again for the first time. No more pretending, no more shadows, just sunlight on hardwood floors and space that finally felt like mine. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it settle around me, wrap itself around the ache, and slowly soothe it. Healing doesn't come like a thunderclap. It arrives in quiet moments you barely notice, until you realize you're breathing easier. I spent the first few weeks reorganizing everything, not just closets and paperwork, but my life. My name was now at the top of every document. Every call with my legal team was a reminder that I had taken control, not just of the assets, but of my story. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman with a plan. I donated Adrian's suits, canceled our joint memberships, and then, one morning over coffee, I opened a blank notebook and wrote, "The Foundation, in honor of my father." It was something I had whispered to myself during the worst nights, a promise I made silently as I fell asleep beside a man who had betrayed me. My father had spent his life building a legacy with integrity, compassion, and purpose. I wasn't going to let that legacy end with court filings and betrayal. I would expand it, give it breath again. I contacted advisors, researchers, and community leaders. The mission was simple: protect, educate, and uplift. Exactly what he did for me. Each day started with more clarity. I woke up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I found comfort in routines again, making coffee, reading reports, walking through the garden my father planted years ago. It felt like I was reclaiming the pieces of myself that had been buried beneath deception. The foundation began taking shape quickly, faster than I expected. And for the first time in a long time, I felt deeply connected to something that didn't ask me to shrink. People began reaching out, former colleagues of my father, young entrepreneurs, even widows who had experienced their own betrayals. Their letters were raw, honest, sometimes heartbreaking. And each one reminded me that I wasn't alone, that what happened to me wasn't just mine to carry. It was part of something larger. I started hosting monthly gatherings at the estate, turning my pain into something that made others feel seen. It wasn't therapy. It was community. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I knew too well. Adrian. I stared at it for a long time, the envelope trembling slightly in my hand. Part of me wanted to read it, to see if he'd finally said something real. But the stronger part, the wiser part, knew better. I dropped it into the shredder without opening it. Because forgiveness doesn't require access. And closure doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's just choosing silence. That evening, I stood in my father's study, the one room I hadn't changed. His photo sat above the fireplace, eyes kind, posture proud, just like I remembered. I walked over slowly, my heels echoing softly on the wood floors, and looked into his face. "I did it," I whispered. Not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman standing in her own truth. I didn't need him to save me anymore, because I had saved myself. I thought back to everything I had lost, and everything I had reclaimed. My trust, my voice, my future. I had loved deeply, yes. I had been deceived, absolutely. But I had also rebuilt something far greater than what had been taken from me. There's a quiet strength in surviving betrayal without letting it poison your spirit. And that's what I had chosen. Not bitterness, not revenge, but self-respect. Boundaries, purpose, love, but on my terms now. As I turned out the light, I paused at the door. For a moment, I imagined the woman I had been a year ago, hopeful, naive, open-hearted. I smiled at her. She wasn't weak. She was simply untested. And now she was standing taller, sharper, unapologetically whole. Whatever came next, I'd face it without flinching, because I wasn't the kind of woman who needed protecting anymore. I had become the kind who protects herself.